But I am interested in freedom. And the Buddha really, that was his only concern. He said, I teach one thing and one thing only, suffering and the end of suffering. And that's my only concern. So if you're not particularly interested in increasing happiness and reducing suffering in the world, you're probably in the wrong room this evening. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is I really honor this study of meditation and its power in the world, its effects in the world. Getting the support of academics doing research really will help to move meditation and the effects of meditation deeper and deeper into the culture, and the culture needs it desperately. You know, unless a lot of us wake up, it doesn't look very good for this civilization, actually. So it's really, I feel, incredibly important. And I feel that actually the tradition of not of Buddhism, you know, it has turned into an organized religion over these 2,600 years because human beings get insecure and they want to have that kind of support. So there are lots of deities, there's a lot of worship, people worship the Buddha. But it's really, I think, important to see that the Buddha's teaching and the practice involves a lot more than meditation. That's like what I would like to offer. I know that many of you are not involved in research about the effects of meditation, but since I was invited here by AMRIG, I'd like to speak to that group, and you can sort of overhear it if that feels okay. There's a lot more to it, and I'd like to just briefly, let's see if I can do it in 5 minutes or less. I'd like to sum up the essence, as I understand it, of what the Buddha was teaching. The most important thing that he discovered, and actually you don't need to know anything more than this one thing in order to free yourself, is that he said it is not what happens to us that causes our happiness or our suffering. It's how we relate to what is happening to us. That is such a radical and amazing insight. And we always have the illusion, you know, my difficult colleague at work is causing my suffering, or the Parkinson's is causing my suffering, or whatever. But actually, really, our freedom or our bondage depends on how we relate to or respond to our experience. We don't have control over what happens to us. But we can learn to master our response. That's the essence of freedom. The Buddha said that what keeps us in suffering, what causes our suffering and maintains, as it were, our suffering, is that our responses are not skillful. And he said that there are basically 3 root tormentors that keep us in suffering, that cause our suffering and keep us in suffering. The most important is ignorance, of believing something to be true that isn't, or believing that something isn't true when it is. And the deepest expression of our ignorance is to believe that we're separate. There's a me here and an it out there. And it's out of that sense of separation, of believing that we are somehow separate, that we then have to defend this separate thing. We have to gratify it and defend it. And so what we tend to do is we grasp for and try to hold on to what we like, what we want, what is pleasurable to us. And we tend to resist and try to push away and keep away things that we don't like, that are unpleasant to us. And that's the whole ball of wax right there. The Buddha said, so the Buddha said, suffering exists. We don't need to argue about that. You can just open the newspaper, turn on the TV. We don't need to get technical. Suffering exists. It has a cause in the reactivity of our minds. It comes out of these qualities of consciousness, of ignorance and greed or grasping, and aversion or resistance. And if something has a cause, then you can remove the cause. And by removing the causes of suffering, then we are free from it. And this is an amazingly radical thing. The Buddha said that it's actually possible to develop our consciousness to the point where fear never arises. It's actually uprooted. Where anger and hatred are uprooted. Where grasping greed are uprooted. Where all confusion is uprooted. It's so radical that it seems unbelievable. And yet thousands and thousands of people have done this through history. Because if something has a recognizable cause, all you have to do is remove the causes. And the Buddha said that if you want to be free, if you want to change your response to your experience, then he said, do these 8 things. And he gave us what is called the Eightfold Path, or an eightfold practice. And forgive me, many of you know this stuff, but it's really important to kind of summarize it, and then have a sense about what the possibilities are. He said, if you want to be free, first develop, the first thing he mentioned is develop clear understanding what is true. And purify intention, and purify speech, purify action, purify livelihood, how we make our living. This is not abstract. It's about absolutely everything in our lives. And then, so there was the ethical part of the practice that has to do with being generous and undertaking the training not to cause harm, but to help. Ethical training. And then there are meditative aspects of the practice, our effort, or the energy that we give to our practice, mindfulness and concentration. And so there's a tripartite practice that has to do with ethical conduct, meditation, and understanding or wisdom. And it's amazing the way they work together in such beautiful ways. They're like the handmade parts of a Lamborghini. Essentially the Buddha said, you're not going to get very far with meditation unless you clean up your act in terms of ethical conduct, which we Westerners tend not to want to hear. We're all wisdom junkies, and we're more interested in doing the meditation, but really it's really necessary also to be ethical. And I'm not talking about being moral. I'm not talking about moral categories of right or wrong, or good or bad, or good and evil. It's the basic golden rule. If you want to be happy, then do to people what you would like them to do to you. That is, to be kind. The Buddha said that if you develop ethical conduct, you will have worldly happiness. You know, good thing.